So, for many of us in the United States that keep up with politics, we've become very cynical over the years. And it's easy to understand why, especially when you consider how there's so many justifications made that politics makes for strange bedfellows. That's what they say. And it's always to justify, people working with somebody that they might not agree with in principle. But for me, it's always a problem of how often we've sided with radical Islamists. You can go back to supporting bin Laden and the Mujahideen against the war with Russia, and how often they were just, at that time, they were just freedom fighting Muslims that were rebelling against, you know, the spread of communism into Afghanistan. Or you can go back to when we were supporting Bosnian Muslims in the early 90s, the Clinton administration, or the support for the Kosovo Liberation Army, also radical Islamist. They were massacring Christians, burning down churches. A lot of that always gets overlooked. The support of the radical Islamists against toppling the Gaddafi regime in Libya, which led to, complete sectarian violence. You've got slave trade now in Libya. There's, all sorts of radical Islamists going on there now because we've basically destabilized Libya. But we just don't seem to learn. We always try to justify it and use radical Islamist, or in this case a quote unquote reformed radical Islamist, guy by the name of Abu Muhammad al-Julani, or now he's going by Ahmed al-Sharaa. And this guy's the new president of the state of Syria. And here he is. He was in the United States just a month ago for meetings with the United Nations. And in this case, I'm going to show you some clips from an interview that he did with General Petraeus, which kind of makes me sick to listen to this guy talk about him. But I'll show you in just a second. But anyway, so this guy is former al-Qaeda, went on to lead the al-Nusra Front in Syria, had some conflicts between ISIS and al-Nusra, and basically aligned with al-Qaeda. We're talking like this guy's like serious hardcore, murdering anybody not down with Islam, kind of Islamist. Like not just a regular practicing Muslim. Like this guy's hardcore. And up until just last year, the United States had a $10 million bounty on his head. But now that's different because he's reformed now. He's trimmed up his beard, trimmed up his hair. He's got a real polished look. And here, this is how General Petraeus, starts off the interview with him.
As you know, Mr. President, I spent over 37 years in the U.S. Army, and I was a soldier, not a diplomat. So I hope you'll forgive me if I speak with the directness of the old soldier that I am as I get the first question out of the way. Because the fact is that we were on different sides when I was commanding the surge in Iraq. You were, of course, detained by U.S. forces for some 5 years, including, again, when I was the four-star there. And here you are now as the president of Syria, which your forces liberated from the murderous Bashar al-Assad regime, to participate in your first UN General Assembly as the president of your country. Earlier this year, you met the President of the United States among many other world leaders. Please help us understand how you got from al-Qaeda in Iraq 20 years ago to where you are today, Syria's head of state on stage in New York City.
Yeah, that's what I want to know. How did this guy go from being the group that was tied in with attacking the World Trade Centers to being back in New York City, being fawned over by all these, globalists and press, it's disgusting. Like, he's just talking about this guy being directly linked to leadership of al-Qaeda, the group that carried out 9/11, according to the official narrative. And now he's back in New York City. How do the people of New York City feel about it? You know, like here he is. Syrian rebel leader's extremist past raises questions about his future. Yeah, absolutely. And rightfully so. But, you know, and don't get me wrong, like if you watch the whole interview, like I watched the whole interview and Petraeus asked him, all these questions like, oh, well, can you justify what happened? And can you, basically ease everybody's concerns about you? And probably softball questions that Jelani was given prior to the interview. So, it's prepared responses, everything's all orchestrated, but this just, it gets into it. See, like, so he dissolves this was Baghdadi wanted him to uh, merge Nusra with ISIS, but he links up with al-Qaeda, and that's because he didn't think ISIS was radical enough. And he goes on to he formed the HTS, which was just recently they lost their terror designation, I believe, this year. But see, in 2018, the United States places a $10 million bounty on Jelani's head. But now this guy's right here in New York, being fawned over. See, here's the next clip. Listen to General Petraeus, and remember this guy Petraeus, he's a big time interventionist. He didn't want us to leave Afghanistan, and yes, don't get me wrong, the Biden administration totally botched our pullout of Afghanistan. But we needed to get out. We need to get out of all these foreign interventionist wars. But Petraeus was against that. Petraeus wants us to keep supporting Ukraine against Russia. Petraeus actually wanted to make sure that we were funding al-Nusra back in 2016. So back before, al-Julani was reformed, Petraeus was wanting to support him back then. This is also the same Petraeus that went on to, after leaving the military, went on to be head of the CIA. And then he got in trouble when he was sleeping with the lady that was writing a book about him. And he got caught giving her information that was, classified information. He got I think like a 2-year probation and $100,000 fine, a slap on the wrist. Pretty typical for all of these insiders that, if anybody else did some of the things they do, they would get, probably some like really ridiculous prison sentences. Or if you listen to people like John Bolton wants to, if anybody releases any classified information, he thinks they should be traitors and hung from an oak tree. I think that's what he said about, can't remember if that was Snowden or who it was, but John Bolton wants to hang people like that from oak trees. But here's General Petraeus having a real touching moment with the former al-Qaeda head.
Security fears for Israel.
Mr. President, I have some sense of how tough your job is right now, how much is riding on you personally, and I know you have to be keenly aware of that. The pressure has to be enormous. When people ask me, what was it like to command the surge in Iraq, I would respond by saying it was the most grinding experience of my life, but it was also the most important one. So this next one is about you personally. How are you holding up under all this pressure? Are you getting time to do some thinking? Are you getting enough sleep at night? Again, I've been there. And it is so very, very hard. And your many fans, and I am one of them, we do have worries.
Did you hear the crowd there? General Petraeus is telling, I'm one of your fans, and the crowd goes, "Aww," like that. It's just so touching and heartwarming. And General Petraeus wants to know how this guy's sleeping at night. How are you sleeping? How are you holding up? How are the families of the dead firefighters from 9/11 holding up? How are the kids that grew up without their mothers and fathers because they died in the World Trade Center attacks? How are they holding up? How are they sleeping? Do we even care about them anymore? And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to harp on this, never forget and all the war propaganda and everything else that went on to carry out all these, seemed like endless wars. But seriously, like, how many people's lives were destroyed because of that? And now we're just like, oh well, this guy's better than Bashar al-Assad, and that's how this will be taken. See, I'm I'm critical of al-Julani, so somehow that would make me a Bashar al-Assad sympathizer. Like, I think Assad was a good guy. Like, no, I'm not saying that Bashar al-Assad was a good guy. Okay, by no means. It's kind of like the Putin thing. If you say anything, considering the Russian point of view and the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, you're a Putin sympathizer. No, Bashar al-Assad was a terrible person, and he's been replaced with somebody that's just as bad. And so, see, here you go. Here's the articles and the think tanks. This is from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. They kind of just go by the Washington Institute. It's a big neocon APAC group. But see, they write this this article here. Enough with the hand wringing. Al-Sharaa is better than Assad. So, despite well-founded worries about the rise of an Islamist government in Syria, the new rulers cannot be any worse than the previous regime, especially now that they are largely disarmed and disinclined to partner with U.S. adversaries like Iran and Russia. Okay, again, nobody's saying that Assad was good, but this whole thing is just like, hey, well, he's better than the last guy, and I don't, I don't know about that. Just because the guy throws on a suit, cleans up his image a little bit, and comes around and says what he wants. How many times now have we been linked to supporting people that we end up fighting down the road? Right now they're saying it's good, but, maybe in a few years we're going to end up fighting these people. I don't know. Like, and see, like, here's stuff I like to point out. So the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Let's see who their board of advisors are. Okay, let's just look at some of these people. So you got Elliot Cohen, you got Michael Mendelbaum, and if anybody knows Seinfeld, Mendelbaum, the big Crepe family. Oh, it's just kind of funny. I saw that name and just kind of made me laugh. But you got Richard Pearl, Condoleezza Rice, all these, just some classic neocons in here that are always about, foreign intervention. You got Henry Kissinger as a previous advisor, George Shultz. It's just a huge list of all these people. Alexander Haig, he was Secretary of State under Reagan and also Chief of Staff, I believe, for maybe Nixon. But Haig's the guy that said, let people protest all they want as long as they pay their taxes. It doesn't matter. But it's just these groups, they publish these articles, and you have all these intellectual types that'll read it and they'll justify what we do because, I'm so much more well informed than the average person because, I've got all these real, like, this will probably be a great spot for Marco Rubio to go after he leaves Secretary of State. He can go be one of the advisors for the Washington Institute. That was one of the things that is as soon as Trump picked Marco Rubio, it was obvious. Like, okay, great. This new Trump administration, it's going to be no different. Nothing's going to change. And I did a video like a year ago when Hegseth was, became Secretary of Defense and, all their support for Israel, because that's another thing. This whole Syria thing ties in to Israel's, expansion. See, like, as soon as al-Julani was able to finally get Bashar out earlier this year, Israel immediately moved to start to occupy part of the at least southwestern parts of Syria. And, that all falls under the whole greater Israeli expansion plan that, of course, it's not an official thing, but if you look at what's happened over the past several decades, it's clear that there's the goal to basically expand Israel's borders to the Old Testament borders. And for some reason, the United States government thinks that we should really kind of help them accomplish that. See, we decry and complain about Putin and say that his wars are wars of expansion and aggression. But when you look at the the Israeli conflicts that are going on. We never question, their goals of expansion and growth. But, so here's Israel shifting troops from Gaza to Syria as another front intensifies. And this is from July this year, but Israel's been occupying, I believe, since March. Maybe it might have been when Israel went there. But, it's just further Israeli expansion. This is talking about this article here goes on to talk about like the history of it with the, Golan Heights and the war in the 70s. Like there's just so much to it. And if you really want to get into the history of that, you should definitely check out Martyr Maid's podcast. He covered it in the he did the Fear and Loathing in New Jerusalem series, which is really great just for the historical context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But then he did a follow-up series of that. It was something about like never-ending war. I don't know. It was another Israeli series, but it kind of covered the wars that went on from post World War II to the Cold War era and current times, and that's a really good podcast. And Martyr Maid actually just released the first episode of his new series, which is going to be World War II from the Germans' point of view. And I'm almost through the first episode of that. That's really good. Super brutal stuff, talking about a lot of the trench warfare from World War One. But Daryl Cooper's just does a really good job. So I can't say it enough how much I think people should definitely check out the Martyr Maid podcast. And the funny thing is that this guy gets so much criticism as being like anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic and Holocaust denier. And the funny thing is that when I listened to his podcast, it actually gave me like a more sympathetic view towards Israel. Because I'd always just kind of I wasn't super familiar until I listened to this series, probably like 6 years ago, maybe the first time. But I wasn't very familiar with a lot of the pogroms and the violence against Jews that kind of led to the establishment of the Zionist movement. And it kind of gives you more insight because Daryl Cooper does a really good job of kind of getting you to empathize and see things from other people's points of view. So I always find it funny when they attack him because I'm like, man, his podcast actually, gave me like much more to where I'm like, okay, I can kind of see where Israel's coming from. Like I can understand their position. And, I don't feel like I'm getting a little off track here talking about that. But anyway, check out Martyr Maid. Great podcast. But then see, like this was Trump from Trump 1.0, the first administration. And this was when we had troops that were still occupying Syria while the conflict was going on against Assad, which we had troops there that were helping the people try to, basically overthrow the Assad regime. But this is why a lot of the people hate Trump at the top, because Trump's not a polished politician. He's a good politician because he's a good salesman and he's good at just basically lying and saying but he's also pretty forthright and will tell you exactly what he's doing. Like, a lot of times it's never about we've got troops there for resources. They'd say like, oh, we're there for protection of the Druze or humanitarian aid. But here's Trump telling you exactly why we were in Syria, a few years ago.
This has been thousands of years in the process between borders between these countries and other countries that we're involved with 7,000 miles away. So we want to worry about our things. We're keeping the oil. We have the oil. The oil is secure. We left troops behind only for the oil. And I have...
See, we left troops behind only for the oil. And what's he saying? He's saying we have the oil. It's our oil. The oil is secure. Whose oil?
The oil. We have the oil. The oil is secure. We left troops behind only for the oil. And I have to just finish by saying...
See, this is what a lot of people don't understand. when they're saying we have the oil, they're talking about multinational corporations. They're talking about people that are going to turn around and use that oil to make a profit. And I don't have a problem with a corporation making a profit. I don't have any issue with that at all. What I have a problem with is when our military is used to secure these resources so the corporations can make a profit. And I'm not even saying that oh, well, maybe we should, take that oil and then nationalize it and let the United States, bring that oil back to the people. I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying that why are our young men and women dying or being, brutally maimed or, destroyed with PTSD or separated from their families? Like, why is our military being used to secure resources for other people? I don't know. That's just where I'm at. But, again, we just need to keep, got to keep holding these people, accountable. We can't keep letting them, guy used to be in al-Qaeda, used to, the same people that I was fighting against when I went to Iraq, these same people are now being, fawned over by our former generals in New York City. And it just makes me sick.